today's subject is going to be about prayers. I'm going to read some hadith about prayers. So in this hadith, narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet ﷺ said, "None of you should offer prayer in a single garment that does not cover the shoulders." Basically, you can pray without covering your shoulders. However, if you cannot afford more than one cloth, which some of the Sahabas couldn't afford back in those days, then the Prophet ﷺ also said, "Whoever prays in a single garment must cross its ends over the shoulders." Now you might wonder, what if your single garment cannot cover your shoulders? Then we have another hadith narrated by Sa'id bin al-Harith. I asked Jabir bin Abdullah about praying in a single garment. He said, "I traveled with the Prophet ﷺ during some of his journeys, and I came to him at night for some purpose, and I found him praying. At that time I was wearing a single garment with which I covered my shoulders and prayed by his side. When he finished the prayer, he asked, 'Oh Jabir, what has brought you here?' I told him what I wanted. When I finished, he asked, 'Oh Jabir, what is this garment which I have seen and with which you have covered your shoulders?' I replied, 'It is a tight garment.' He said, "If the garment is large enough, wrap it around the body, covering the shoulders, and if it is tight, meaning too short, then use it as an izar. Tie it around your waist only." Hadith narrated by Aisha radiallahu anha. The Prophet ﷺ prayed in a khamisa, a square garment having marks. During the prayer, he looked at his marks. So when he finished the prayer, he said, "Take this khamisa of mine to Abu Jam and get me his in Bijania, a woolen garment without marks, as the khamisa has diverted my attention from the prayer." The Prophet ﷺ said, "I was looking at its marks during the prayers, and I was afraid that it may put me in trial by taking away my attention." Another example of this is this hadith narrated by Anas radiallahu anhu. Aisha radiallahu anha had a qiram, a tin-marked woolen curtain with which she had screened one side of her home. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Take away this qiram of yours, as its pictures are still displayed in front of me during my prayer," meaning they diverted my attention from the prayer. Hadith narrated by Abu Maslama, Sa'id bin Yazid al-Asdi. I asked Anas bin Malik whether the Prophet ﷺ had ever prayed with his shoes on. He replied affirmative, saying yes. Hadith narrated by Hudayfa that he saw a person bowing and prostrating imperfectly. When he finished his salat, Hudayfa told him that he had not offered salat. The sub-narrator added, "I think that Hudayfa also said, were you to die, you would die on a sunnah, a legal way other than that of Muhammad ﷺ." So what is the correct way to prostrate? In this hadith, narrated by Abdullah bin Malik ibn Buhayna, when the Prophet ﷺ prayed, he used to separate his arms from his body so widely that the whiteness of his armpits was visible. This is an important hadith and many people don't know this actually. Narrated by Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, the Prophet ﷺ said, "While defecating, neither face nor turn your back to the Qibla, but face either east or west." Abu Ayyub added, "When we arrived in Sham, we came across some lavatories, meaning washrooms, facing the Qibla. Therefore we turned ourselves while using them and asked for Allah's forgiveness." Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, Allah's Messenger ﷺ used to pray optional non-obligatory prayers while riding on his mount, wherever it turned, and whenever he wanted to pray the compulsory prayer, he dismounted and prayed facing the Qibla. This shows that when you're praying nafil prayers, like optional prayers, you can pray in like a car or on a bus, but when it's time to pray the compulsory dismount and pray standing while facing the Qibla. Hadith narrated by Anas bin Malik, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Spitting in the mosque is a sin and its expiation is to bury it," meaning scrape it off, clean it. Hadith narrated by Ibn Umar, the Prophet ﷺ had said, "Offer some of your prayers, nawafil, at home, and do not take your houses as graves." I don't know exactly how to interpret this hadith, but it has like two meanings. One is like do not take your houses as graves. Basically means that you can pray in graveyards. And second is a house where no one prays is basically like a graveyard. Hadith narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, Allah's Messenger ﷺ said, "I have been given 5 things which were not given to any amongst the prophets before me. These are: 1. Allah made me victorious by awe, by his frightening my enemies for a distance of 1 month's journey. 2. The earth has been made for me and for my followers a place for praying and a thing to perform tayammum. Therefore my followers can pray wherever the time of a prayer is due. 3. The booty has been made halal, lawful for me, and was not made so for anyone else. 4. Every prophet used to be sent to his nation exclusively, but I have been sent to all mankind. 5. I have been given the right of intercession on the day of resurrection." Narrated by Nafi, Abdullah bin Umar said, "I used to sleep in the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ while I was young and unmarried." Narrated by Abu Qatada al-Aslami, Allah's Messenger ﷺ said, "If any one of you enters a mosque, he should pray 2 rak'at before sitting." I'll end with this hadith, narrated by Ibn Umar. Whenever Allah's Messenger ﷺ came out on Eid day, he used to order that a harba, a short spear, to be planted in front of him as a sutra for his prayer, and then he used to pray facing it with the people behind him, and he used to do the same while on a journey. After the Prophet ﷺ, this practice was adopted by the Muslim rulers who followed his traditions. So what this hadith tells us is that the sutra for the imam, the person leading the prayer, is enough for everyone else behind him. So you don't need a sutra for everyone. So that were the hadiths for in this video. If you wanna add something, you can always let me